Part 2 coming up today, right now. We're continuing where we left off. You really need to focus on this material. It's very simple in one way. It's like find out about where you are in the uric acid range on a regular basis, not just once a year, and then figure out what to do about it, which we talk about. Let's get into it. Where are most people today in terms of daily protein consumption? This was, again, from one of the studies from my previous presentations. This was to show that most people are under eating their protein per day. Here's one group of 51 to 64, and then over 65. And you can see that all in all, here's the plant is that top little part, that not one, the animal is the striped, not one makes it across a line. Maybe borderline one meal barely makes it to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So that's pretty bad. So here, as they got the over 65, no meals, no one time did the amount of protein stimulate muscle protein synthesis right across. So they need to increase their protein. But if they calculated it and ate, whether it's breakfast, late morning, early afternoon, and dinner, perfect. That's what they could do. And that would solve the problem. So the point with that was most people eat one meal a day or very close. That's their big meal and a lot of little snacking throughout the day. But purines from diet, exogenous purines, are not the only problem. See related videos on this. I'll put the link right above. Done this, and there's a playlist. It goes into some of the details that I don't want to go into right now. So what we're told to believe is making uric acid depends on fructose and alcohol. So your sodas, your beer, your different alcohols. And what it does, this is all about your liver. ATP, which we all know from high school, that's the currency of energy for our whole body, right? To make our liver work, it needs ATP. To make our brain work, it needs ATP. I know it needs glucose and everything else, but ATP is very much involved, right? That's why we're all about ATP. We talk about mitochondria, it's ATP. So when ATP is used, it eventually breaks down. So adenosine triphosphate gets broken down to adenosine, which is basically a purine that as we use this cash, right? If you go and you buy something, you use your cash, what's left over are purines. So the more stuff we force our liver and a little bit of our gut to detoxify for us, the more these ATPs are used up and makes uric acid. So that's on us. I mean, we have to think about what we're eating. So you can say this is kind of diet, but it's mostly about metabolic. It has a disproportionately bad problem here. And then there's the purine. So most people think of diet as this part over here, and this is the metabolic. These are the big culprits. But those are the top three: fructose, alcohol, and purines, what you're eating. But wait, there's more. What about vitamin A? That would be an organ meat. Absolutely. Vitamin A is independently correlated with elevating uric acid. Where does that come from? Well, nearly everywhere. People put it in their vitamins and so on and so forth. So it's become more than just a food situation. It's become a vitamin situation, a supplement situation. So you got to be careful with vitamin A, not carotene, beta carotene, but vitamin A. Okay, making uric acid. The other thing with this sort of orientation is low omega-3 foods. Unless you're having wild-caught salmon, unless you're taking supplements on a regular basis, fish oil supplements, you are low in omega-3. I've talked all about the omega-3-6 ratio in various videos and the importance of taking that as a lab. And you can see that video. So you need to increase your omega-3 and drop your omega-6 because all the processed foods is really what we're talking about. All this stuff is elevated, not so much the purines. That would be actually good omega-3 food, but it would be high. All those cereals they're recommending are very high omega-6. Okay, uric acid and cognitive decline, it's a double-edged sword. On low levels, they find low serum uric acid is associated with Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. High uric acid levels is associated with vascular dementia and cerebral vascular decline in older patients. So patients with gout may have a decreased incidence for Alzheimer's if you attend to the uric acid because you're feeling your foot pain. The relationship between serum uric acid and neurological disorders may be U-shaped. And there you go. Low, you have that over there, and high, you have cognitive decline. So what you have is one level for women. If women can be between 2 and 4, perfect. If men can be under 5.5, great. I struggle to be under 5.5. I'm certainly not there, and I will get into paying attention to that. It's it's a real new phenomenon, and I think is a very important thing to pay attention to. So neuroprotective, one side's neuroprotective, we talked about that. And the other side, this is uric acid. The other side is neurotoxic. How can it possibly be? Well, it's like everything else when you think about it. Deficiencies is toxic, if you will, and you have too much, it's toxic. So you want the Goldilocks spot. Uric acid and cognitive function in older individuals. Okay, so the case for fructose. Our consumption has gone through the roof over the last 70 years. Here's obesity and high fructose corn syrup. Here you have total fructose or fructose. Then you have obesity. You notice these two lines. That's pretty much lockstep with obesity prevalence. Here's free fructose. When they say free fructose, so that's actually not in sucrose. That's fructose that they've isolated, put it in your foods, separate. They've put it in those little packets. If you ever go to a coffee shop, they have fructose over there as the natural alternative sweetener. And then here's high fructose corn syrup. So all of those things, the discovery, these two here are about fructose. It is a very big reason for the incidence of both rates of gout over the last 40 years and elevated uric acid levels increasing. So this is just another picture. High fructose corn syrup going up, goes up with total caloric sweeteners. Here's U.S. sugar intake versus obesity, something we've kind of known for a while. But here they go, percentage of artificial sweeteners. Look at that. Boom. So just as sugar was coming down, so people were switching over to artificial sweeteners saying, well, I want to be thinner and I don't want to live unhealthy. But they took all this other chemical stuff, which was just as bad. And it's going up. So the difference between table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Sucrose, sugar, whether it's sugar beets or cane sugar, that's where we get our real world sugar, is 50-50 for the most part. High fructose corn syrup, even though they call it high fructose, comes in two different forms. It's either 58% fructose or 45% fructose. So there you go. I'm sorry, 42 and 55. So you can see there is such a thing as high fructose corn syrup that is actually not higher than glucose. It's become so cheap, people are having this a lot more than they ever had sugar before. And that's the point. So natural sweeteners, when you hear people say, oh, have agave nectar, look how much fructose is in that. Over, I'll call it 80%. Then pear juice concentrate, we knew that from before. And it goes on all the way on up. And there's the low point on this particular graph is high fructose corn syrup of the 42%. The high point, just remember agave. Bad stuff. Okay, metabolic turnover. So this is basically what I want you to etch in your mind. There's really three reasons. Your metabolism that's going to happen with or without you. Your liver is always making uric acid. If you load it up by toxins, alcohol, fructose, you're now going to have that cellular turnover even higher and higher and higher. I'm going to go into that in a second. How fructose causes overproduction of uric acid. Here's the deal. So there's your liver. Fructose, remember we had this clever idea back when we evolved 14 million years ago. It happened to be at the ice age, so food was getting scarce. Learning to eat fruit in the trees that were also evolving was a good thing, but we had to get around the fructose part, which was a toxin. So we learned to digest fructose and make it into glucose. That's a win. That's a big win. But we only could do a little bit at a time. So consequently, that served us well for about 14 million years until, what, the last couple hundred, if not the last 70? That what happens is you use up all your phosphate very quickly. I'm not going to go into all this. And when it doesn't have enough stuff left over, you've overstimulated, you've put an over demand, too much of a demand on the system, it simply is going to make fat. Triglycerides, 1, 2, 3, those are triglycerides. So it is a cause for what they call fatty liver. Fatty liver is measured on MRI. They take a picture, that's a big liver. All they can do, it's a fatty liver if it's bigger. So here's the same thing. Fructose comes in and it uses up that currency. It uses up all your ATP that gets broken down to ADP, AMP, and so on and so forth, down to adenosine, and all that becomes uric acid. So it's using up all the ATP. You're not getting your glucose, and it makes fat. So understanding uric acid levels, uric acid are an end product of the metabolism that is excreted in the urine. Unfortunately, urate are poorly soluble in water. So urates, or uric acid, is not a very soluble thing. It's very limited. So in contrast to other mammals, humans don't have the enzyme to convert them into a more soluble compounds. Therefore, human uric acid level of 6.4 is something we have, but all the other animals don't. This 6.4 is very high in comparison to them, right? They just squirt it out. It's good. So we get an even higher on that. It is just below the physical solubility limit. If the uric acid concentration rises above this level, 6.4, and it's generally agreed upon, uric acid crystals precipitate. Remember, it's just like that high school, or maybe it was elementary school, you kept on dissolving sugar in hot water, and eventually you hit a point you couldn't dissolve any more sugar. You already was saturated. Then you'd let that sit around and you see crystals form, right? So what had to happen? You had the hot water, you dissolved all the sugar, and you reached that saturation level, then you let it cool. The crystals came when it cooled, right? Same thing. Cooling the body, cooling the blood brings the crystals out, and that's when it shows up in your big toe or your fingers, wherever else. So the long-lasting exposure may inflict damage on the body in the long term. An elevated value of 7.0 and above is considered risk factor for developing gout. And well beyond that, that's 2018. So here's basically what I told you about. Unsaturated solution, more solute, which is the uric acid dissolves. Eventually you hit saturation point, supersaturated solution, potential for crystal growth. So they find, and this is just, the data is pretty clear on this, that once you cross that line, he said 7, we just read 7. 7 is a line in which gout incidence starts going up. When you get to 8.5, it starts zooming up regardless of either sex, especially postmenopausal women. So knowing what your uric acid level is important. Not just once a year you went in and it was on your blood work that your doctor told you to do. You should spend a week getting to know at a certain time of day what it is, and then do another time of day. You should be friends with your uric acid level, know what makes it go up and what makes it go down, because it will affect you as you get older. This is the big discovery. So elevated fructose consumption is implicated in oxidative stress, inflammation, higher uric acid levels, hypertriglyceremia, I just told you about that, higher systolic blood pressure, and insulin resistance, which are associated with the development or worsening of liver diseases. And that's 2021. So this is new news. So we have hypertriglyceremia, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, oxidative stress, and this is all about fructose. Here we go. Fructose is showing you the same thing. Lipogenesis, making fat. Oxidative stress is increasing. Uric acid increasing. Inflammation increasing. Dysbiosis, which is gut problem, increasing. It's killing off some of your bacteria and viruses and everything else. Fructose in the liver. 2021, it's headed towards NASH, necrosis. It's killing your liver. So what's the difference between non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis? Well, the difference is this. NASH and NALFT is if you have fat but no damage to your liver, that's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Once you start getting elevated liver enzymes, we have some troubles going on, fatty liver is going to, this is all spectrums of alcohol, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, even though alcohol could be part of this too. Fatty liver, NASH, cirrhosis. This is a dead liver. You're either going to die or you need a liver transplant. Think of Mickey Mantle, if you will. But if you have fat in your liver plus signs of inflammation, liver cell damage, it's called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Hepatitis means swelling of the liver, and your eyes will be turning yellow. That's NASH. So now you have the model in your mind. There's 3 components to cranking up purines, which are the problem, right? You have your diet, which is now a small thing that you can control. You have your metabolism, which either is cranking out a lot of purines because you're putting it under stress, right? The stress would be the alcohol, the fructose, or environmental things that it needs to detoxify, such as heavy metals like lead. All right, so, but how alcohol can cause an overproduction of uric acid. So here is 2014, this is Boston University, and it basically says alcohol quantity and type on risk of recurrent gout attacks. And I will save the punchline for you. So this is, alcohol has been a factor since way back. They basically, even way back in Egypt, they basically figured out, well, it's coming in the mouth. We either drink it or we eat it. They didn't quite know what was causing it. So conclusion to this study is episodic alcohol consumption, regardless of type of alcohol beverage, was associated with an increased risk of recurrent gout attacks, including potentially with moderate amounts. Therefore, persons with gout should limit their alcohol intake to reduce the risk of current gout attacks. What they didn't reference was what kind, what was their context and so on. What else did they eat this with? And in the study that I didn't post here, in the same study, so you can go look it up, is that they found whoever was having alcohol and was having meats, high protein meats at the same time, made it worse. Wine drinkers were the least affected, but they were affected. And they're saying the reason that was that wine drinkers are so better. He says wine drinkers in general are healthier. They make healthier choices in life. So it wasn't about a wine thing. It was about the other choices in life, what they call a lifestyle factor that correlate with this. Okay, so when did people start drinking? Well, we don't know, but I did go back to check if was alcohol available at 2,640 years before Christ. About 5,000 years ago? And the answer is ancient Egypt. Brewing dates from the beginning of civilization in ancient Egypt, and alcoholic beverages were very important at the time. Egyptian brewing began 3400 BC, so that's 6,500 years ago. Ruins of the world's oldest brewery was capable of producing up to 300 gallons per day. Wow! Symbolic of this is the fact that while many gods were local or familial, Uric, which is a sun god, was worshipped throughout the entire country. Uric, believed to be the god of the dead, of life, of vegetable regeneration, and of wine. Of wine, not beer, not spirits. Don't know if they had spirits then. Both beer and wine were deified and offered to the gods. Was alcohol really that big of a deal back then? Cellars and wine presses even had a god whose hieroglyph was a wine press. The ancient Egyptians made at least 17 types of beer. Wow, that's more than Seattle. And at least 24 varieties of wine. Huge. Do you know any vineyard that does more than 24 types of wine? Most common beer was known as HQT. Beer was the drink of common laborers at the Gaza. Pyramid builders were allotted a daily beer ration of 1 1/3 gallons. So 1 1/3 gallons of beer they got every day while they worked on building the pyramids, which supposedly took only 26 years. Alcoholic beverages were used for pleasure, nutrition, medicine, ritual, remuneration, payment, and funeral purposes. The latter involved storages of beverage in tombs of the deceased for their use in the afterlife. So they had a great appreciation for alcohol, don't you think? Maybe there's another reason why alcohol affects uric acid, other than the fact that it depletes the ATP and the ATP becomes more purines. It does that. So know that it does that. It's the same thing with fructose. And it ends up using up the ATP and the demand is too high. But here's another thing. Alcohol. Not everyone has the same problem with alcohol. And there is a gene here. And I'm going to show you about this gene. It's more of a polymorphism, right? It's common enough that most people have it. So there's this gene called ADH, or specifically it's called ADH2, the wild type, which is the dominant type. And that's fine. That can break down alcohol, right? So if you have this gene, which is the majority of the people, you can break down alcohol, not a problem. If you have what they call ADH2, another mutant, is that you can't break down alcohol very, very well. And what happens when you drink alcohol, it goes through a half step. The half step is to acetaldehyde. And that is a toxin. Not only is it a toxin, it's carcinogenic. It is a bad toxin. So alcohol actually makes it into something worse, or the liver actually makes it into something worse, dangerous for you. And then that quickly has to be broken down. So we're talking about the ability to take acetaldehyde and make it into something that's non-toxic form. We can't all do that well. And so if we have this gene, and plenty of people have that gene, it's mostly Asian, but there's a lot of people that I see, and I'm going to show you, have that gene and have a problem. One thing, if you ever go to a social gathering, we'll call it a party, and some people, if they have wine in particular, will get a red nose, and some people get a red, you saw the big red nose, you see pictures of W.C. Fields, and the classic picture cartoon of a drunk is a red nose. Why the red nose? Well, the red nose shows that it's a person who can't break down alcohol that well. So say no to glow, reducing carcinogenic effects of ADLDH, which is aldehyde dehydrogenase 2 deficiency. 2019. How do I know if I have ALDH2 deficiency? Turning red is the most obvious result of having that deficiency. I just told you that. But symptoms also include headaches, dizziness, hypotension, low blood pressure, heart palpitations. Acetaldehyde accumulates in these ADLDH2 deficient people. So for people who have this deficiency, and drink, acetaldehyde will accumulate to toxic levels. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified acetaldehyde associated with alcohol consumption as a group 1 carcinogen. Top of the toxic pile. Top of the toxic pile. Acetaldehyde levels up to 50 micromolars, it's just a unit, are considered toxic and cause mutations in DNA. The strongest effects are seen in the mouth. That's you drink, right? You drink it here. So where does this start breaking down? It breaks down in the mouth, right? And it certainly breaks down in the liver and so on and so forth. After 2 to 3 servings of alcohol, which is this amount per body weight, if you want to look at that, salivary acetaldehyde deficient individuals quickly went over that line. They quickly were way over what was the safe line compared to normal levels, which was under 20, people who could actually break it down. What's the big deal? What happens? Well, the big deal is there's now links to various cancer rates. People with ALDH2 deficiency are 2 to 8 times more likely to develop head and neck cancers, oral pharyngeal laryngeal cancers, are 2 to 12 times more likely to develop esophageal cancer. So this is from people who I've actually seen, and they're not all Asian, I can tell you that, but the highest concentration in the world, as we know this whole genome understanding so far, are Asian, in particular Taiwanese. And so they are eager to find out about what they can do, but it's not as you think. So if you have this mutation down here, that's what this means. Plus means you're homozygous. So these are the 2 different, and we're talking about this one here, the 671, you see this? So that is homozygous. It means they have a high cancer risk, but guess what? They have a low gout risk. In terms of gout, alcohol is not a major factor. It's a factor, but it's not a major factor. So if they have no cancer risk and they don't have these mutations, they have a high gout risk. How's that? Okay, so many other studies support this as well. 2009, 17, I could have put another 10 in there. Alcohol flushing response, an unrecognized risk factor for esophageal cancer from alcohol consumption. And here's that polymorphism in alcohol-related cancers in Asians. Other special mentions, common substances that raise serum uric acid, nicotinic acid or niacin, aspirin, low doses aspirin is a causative factor. High dose aspirin, we're talking about aspirin, not NSAIDs. High dose aspirin actually brings down uric acid. You go figure that one out. Okay, glycerol. Glycerol is actually a natural sweetener. It's in our body. So we have triglycerides. They are attached to a glycerol backbone. But glycerol, if we take it as in our diet, stimulates uric acid production, lowers cells ATP. Same old, drops the ATP, breaks it up, creates more purines. Uric acid production correlates inversely with ATP, right? Well, because it broke it down. Okay, special mentions, xylitol, 5-carbon sugar alcohol. Tell you about that one in a second. Sorbitol is converted to fructose when metabolized. Testosterone. Testosterone replacement therapy increases uric acid in dose-dependent manner. Recent study, serum uric acid increased after 3 months of testosterone replacement therapy. Testosterone-induced gout has been reported. Testosterone treatment leads to increased serum uric acid levels and reduced renal excretion of uric acid. Problem, that's 2017. That's not very long ago. So we hear all these ads about, hey guys, you need to get testosterone to get your muscles up, or women, you need your sex drive, or whatever it is. It's not without its consequences, and you really need to think about what other ways can we go about this, because there's consequences. So the bottom line is you have 2 things to do to control your uric acid. You need to look at the basic factors in your diet, right? That's what we've been talking about, the list, however general you want to look at it, that are known to increase your uric acid. And second, you need to monitor your levels. So whether you're going to go to a lab on a weekly basis, but you need to know where you are. This is self-awareness. This is self-awareness of your specific personal data. This is important. I'm telling you now, I brought you into saying this is uniquely important. This isn't just a flash in the pan to do the video, to hope you watch it. This is important. So now monitors are coming out to the market, and we have a connection with one that I use, and I'll show you what I do. Need to monitor your levels and know where your levels are and how you think they got there. You know, are they high or low? What'd you do? Let's look at the labs, especially, or monitor. If you are a carnivore or a ketovore or keto, you need to be doing this. Don't be stupid. Okay, 4-6 is who we work with, and I like this a lot. It's important to measure uric acid. Here's some labs that both Judi and I had done. So that's going to a lab. It was part of a panel. I just did a screenshot of a portion of it. Look at me. This is about a year ago. I was 6. and Judy's 2.4. So she's like, not a thing to worry about. Carl's like at the edge, absolutely. And I'll tell you my story later, we're putting all this data together, but I take this seriously because this has gotten, I won't say out of hand, but have had some, I've never been diagnosed with gout, but I think that's what I have. I've been diagnosed with pseudo-gout, and I think that was a misdiagnosis. And so now I'm watching uric acid levels, and I get it, and it's very important. Okay, so in this, the nice thing about this particular FORA 6, it measures uric acid, cholesterol, glucose, and ketones all at the same time. So I put them in, and also it's Bluetooth connected, so it's all put into my phone anyway, and I can download it, as you'll see in a second. But whether I do it or it does it, it's fine. So the context is everything. It's not just one thing, it's at least 4 things. I like the uric acid, the glucose, and the ketones, and the cholesterol is probably the least most important for me because it's been so constant. So here's what it looks like. Example, glucose. So here's the range it gives you, and here's the time of day that I had these glucose. Look, I had 118. I find that hard to believe that I had 118, but we'll take it for what it was. I was just learning to use this material. That's my excuse. And then it graphs it out for you. So what I would do, if I were you, don't do what I did. Start at one time, because then you're going to see how each time is different. So if you're doing it 5 o'clock every morning, then you'll see a week's worth of 5 o'clock every morning. It'd be much more coherent. But here I've had different times, and therefore you have a odd graph. And so there was the average of the glucose. That's still pretty high if you ask me. So that's what that looks like. On the description area, the link, there's a link there, and you get a nice discount. I would definitely look into it. I would definitely take some responsibility. Get a meter, whatever kind of meter, but get one. And here again is glucose, cholesterol, ketones lined up by time now. And so let me take a better reading. There's another 5 o'clock, 105, 270. There's my cholesterol. So my cholesterol is pretty much the same. And you know, in the morning, and that's fine. I'm fine with that number. So, and there's ketones, and there's uric acid. I also compare this to the Keto Mojo, so I get a belt and suspenders, and I see if there's a correlation. You know, I like to compare. What I've already discovered by my morning monitoring levels for a few days was xylitol was a big deal. I don't have a lot of xylitol, but Judi has a cooking channel, and she makes some sweets and makes the ice cream, and the sweetener is a xylitol. I never would have thought about it. I used to actually promote through my medical practice back in the early 2000s, xylitol was coming out, and it was good for your microbiome and all these other things and cavities, and it still is that, but it's bad for your uric acid. So it's good for a lot of other things, and we'll get into that later, but it's bad for your uric acid. So independently, it popped me up 4 points and from morning to morning, and that's the important to compare about those mornings. I love liver in addition to the purines, vitamin A, maybe copper. But vitamin A we know is associated with increase, and so I got to back off on that. These are things because I knew my levels in my pattern. I could say that thing did that to me, and I can now take it in moderation or not take it at all. I'm not giving up liver. So coming up next, what changes I did and how do I know that they're successful? So if this is something that you're interested in, that is a topic that I obviously go deeper in terms of labs, in terms of how to do it, in terms of why you would want to do it, various topics, as you've seen that I've done in the past, then please let me know below in a comment. Till then.